Yeah, man. The world of synthesizers and samplers connecting. Is it possible? We're going to have a look at that today. Follow me. The machine. Trusty companion for me personally, hopefully for you too. Most of us don't use the sampler of the machine to its full potential. More so along the ways of how you would operate a drum sampler such as the MPC. But if we have a look at the good old days, the first samplers were indeed intended to be used in a more keyboardy fashion. In this here video and a couple of upcoming ones, we're going to have a look at what kind of juices can we squeeze out of the machine and hopefully find some innovative ways. Dangerous! What we have right about around here is a sample from a record. What does this have to do with using the sampler as a synthesizer, you wonder? Well, first you have to know how a synthesizer operates. A synthesizer contains various different components that affect the signal path of an electrical current to make sound. We're not going to dive too deep into it right about around now, but the oscillator is what first generates a sound wave, and then it goes through the other little different parts and then shapes the sound. So the idea here is we want to take a small little chunk of the sample that will act as our waveform. So usually on a synthesizer, an oscillator might generate a sine wave or a square wave, sawtooth wave, etc. Now here we're going to take a piece of the sample and use that as our waveform. And later on we can process it with the various different functions of the machine sampler. Other components generally included in a synthesizer are ADSR envelope, which you shape the overall ADSR of the sound with. Attack, decay, sustain, release, that is. You got your filters, a filter envelope that you can shape the filter with. LFO, that's low frequency oscillation that you can use to modulate the sound with in all types of different ways. You can set glide on it so you get sort of a gliding effect between the notes. And other capabilities such as mod wheel destination, where you decide what the mod wheel is going to control. If you want some vibrato, if you want tremolo, or whatever when you're twisting the mod wheel on your keyboard. So the machine has all of these things in its sampler engine, which is pretty ingenious. So we're going to take a piece of the sample here, and this is going to act as our waveform. Amazing. Now we set the start and the end points of a very small piece of the sample, and very shortly you will notice when we press the pad we're not going to hear much because it's very low in amplitude, and we haven't looped anything, so this is a tiny little click. So we need to go to zone, and this is where we get all of the useful functions for if you're making sounds that are played on a keyboard typically. So go to the right and you'll find here the loop points. We want to loop this waveform. So first of all, turn loop on with the first encoder to your upper left here. And still, we're looping such a small part with the low amplitude that we're not hearing anything. Before we looped it, it was just going one cycle. So on a synthesizer, if you generate, for instance, a sine wave, that's going to be looping over and over and over because it's constantly generating a sine wave. So that's what we want to simulate here with a piece of our sample. So let's just browse around and find another part we can use. Another note on the amplitude I was talking about. Amplitude means volume. So in this particular space of the sample, the amplitude or a volume of the sample is very low. We could raise it by just using a compressor or pushing the gain on it or distorting it or whatever, but right now we're just going to look for another piece of the sample which is a little bit more louder. Now let's adjust our loop point, and a little science expert pro tip on the side. If you haven't noticed it before, if you didn't know, in case you didn't know, the longer the cycle is, the lower the pitch. The shorter the cycle, the higher the pitch. There are synthesizers that operate this way, and they're called wavetable synthesizers. So that's basically what we're doing here, wavetable synthesis. Magnificently raw shit. Now, usually when I have something I want to keep working on, I'll try and tune it to a C3, a C note, the third C note on the keyboard, because that's the default root key. That way you won't be playing the wrong chords and the wrong scales on your keyboard afterwards. So what I'm gonna do here is load up a sound, basic Rhodes sound, and that's a C3. Now we want to match the tone with this instrument. You can do this here on the main sampler page. You can flip to the second page and just tune it. You could also do it inside of the sampler itself, but I usually just do it here. And you will have to use the shift function as you tune it to fine-tune the pitch as close as possible to a clean C note. This is good earring training for you. Close enough, my hun. Fuck yeah. If you ever wondered what all these pages are for, these are things you can utilize that you also usually find on a synthesizer. First off, let's talk about the ADSR envelope that I mentioned before. Attack, the higher value on the attack is gonna make a longer fading in of the sound. Decay is how long it takes for the sound to reach sustain level volume, which it stays at until you let go of the key. And release is how long it takes for the sound to fade out after you let go. Flipping to the next page, we all have these convenientary quick effects that I love to use. So we'll push up the volume a little bit by compressing it and pushing up the drive a little bit just to get some more volume in here. You can also, of course, crush the sample rate or the bit rate right here if you wanna. That's if you're going for a more lo-fi or perchance a video gamey type sound. Here we have our filters. Now messing around with a low pass filter, we have all types of filters right here, just like on most synthesizers as well. So let's go with a low pass filter, mess around with push up the resonance a bit and play with the cutoff and see what it does. Now the fun actually starts when you start modulating the filter envelope, so you get some animation to the sound. That's basically one of the key things when you program a synthesizer, because it has no life from the beginning. You want to animate it. On the next page we find our first modulation capabilities. On the right screen you got your pitch, cutoff of the filter, drive and pan, which you can animate over time using this envelope. So think of this envelope sort of like the ADSR envelope, except you're controlling these here things, and the ADSR envelope is for controlling the volume of the overall sound over time from when you press the key to when you let it go. So if we set the cutoff to 100% on the right screen and set the attack to 1 second, that means it's going to take 1 second from the moment that you press the key until the cutoff goes to 100 on the filter. And the same thing with the other things. You could make the pitch go up 100% or make it pan over time, all according to the modulation envelope. Try cranking up the resonance on the filter if you want a more dramatic effect to see. Just experiment to see what it does to the sound. Just to be a little extra clear, try cranking up the pitch and see what that does to the sound. Very key if you're designing drum sounds. With a short attack, short decay, low sustain, you'll have a percussive sound. Experiment. Try to find out on your own how to do that. Next page. LFO. Low frequency oscillator. It's a little bit complicated. Are you with me now? On the right page, if it's set to 0, it's not going to do anything to the sound. If it's below 0, the mod wheel destination on the page coming after that one will affect it. If it's above 0, it's going to be affected all the time. Using the LFO, we can make the pitch, cutoff, drive, or pan wobble at the speed that we like. So let's try to pitch here. See what happens. Up and down she goes. Right now it's moving in the shape of a sine wave. If we increase the frequency here, that's how fast it's going to wobble. And it's going to do it all the time, constantly right now. Like I said before, if the values on the right screen are above 0, it's going to affect it all the time. Let's try another shape. Triangle. Little less smooth ride, but still pretty smooth. Square, on the other hand, though, is very sharp. Up and down, up and down. So the highest it goes is however far you want to let it go with the pitch on the right screen, or any other value you want to change. If we have a look at sync here, the parameter sync, the fourth knob, it's set to follow the frequency or the speed that you choose. But if we set it to re-trigger or lock, well, they both sync to the BPM, so you can set a timing. Right now it's set to 16ths right here. Re-trigger means that your modulation is gonna restart every time you press the key. And lock, on the other hand, will remember when you let go of the key and keep the modulation going from there when you press it again. For this case, I just want to modulate the pitch a little bit so it's kind of waving back and forth to get a little detuned effect and make it sound a little bit more alive. Like an old synthesizer, slightly detuning. And then we're going to make it float from left to right a little bit with a pan parameter right here. Again, if we wanted to control these things with the mod wheel, we would go below 0 instead and set how much the mod wheel is going to affect these values on the next page. With the velocity destination settings, you can change parameters depending on how hard you press a pad or the keys. Notice it's set to 100 on volume by default. If you set this to 0, it's not going to be velocity sensitive anymore, which is more suited for example, synth lead sounds, like monophonic synth sounds, Mogi type sounds, and things of that nature, where you don't want the velocity sensitivity that you might want if you're playing a piano sound or electric piano, maybe a more expressive synth sound. So I'm going to go with 0 here because I don't want the velocity sensitivity. Mod wheel destination is where you control what happens when you pull up the mod wheel on your keyboard, or on the machine for that matter. Say you wanted to add a vibrato on the pitch, you would pull up the LFO depth here, and on the previous page you would make sure that the pitch is set below 0. Then when you pull up the mod wheel, it's going to start going back and forth in pitch. First page of the sampler, we got our polyphony. That's how many notes you can play at the same time. If we set this to legato, you can only play one note at once. And if we pull up the glide, it's going to glide between the notes. Very useful for synthesizer solos. If you're playing on the pads, you can activate the pitch and the mod wheel on the touch strip like so, and control it right away. I want to play some chords, however, so I'm going to set the polyphony to a somewhat higher number. Drummer time! Fuck the metronome on this one. It is rhythmical. I want to add some reverb to make the drums a little bit more interesting, which are, by the way, from the upcoming Dangerous sound kit. What to go with on this one? You know what? Let's flesh it up. Make it real larger than life. I hope you learned something today, peoples. If you find me to be a visceral part of your life, please subscribe and ring the bell to get the notification when my motherfucking video comes up. If you want to save the world, support me, check out my Patreon site, donate $1 or $2, or check out my Bandcamp where you can also throw in a bunch of rich money for me. Don't remember also to not remember the Beats Clothes store, where you can buy some radical clothes, such as this piece of clothing right here, and more other. And if you need beats or something else, hit up to me. Thank you for watching my purples. You have a great one till next time. Okay, bye-bye. Stay mazing.